Welcome to the Scientific Worldview, the podcast dedicated to exploring the big questions in science and philosophy. I am Daniel Gambacorta.
I'm Atana Shannon.
Atana, last episode we talked a bit about personality. I want to kick off this episode talking about personality development.
Let's do it.
Has your personality changed as you have aged?
I wouldn't say so. I think I got more angsty as a teenager.
Okay. So you're a bit less angsty now, or did you maintain that level of angst?
It waxes and wanes.
Fair enough. Personality is fairly stable. If you are the most extroverted person in your age group today, a year from now, you're probably still going to be one of the most extroverted people. That said, over long periods of time, personality does change. We track people over decades. On average, as we age, we become more agreeable, more conscientious, and less neurotic.
So there's hope for the neuroticness.
Yes, I do think this is all basically good news.
Good.
Yeah, you tend to worry less as you get older.
Makes some sense. I wonder if those are consistent with like teenage years too, because I feel like as a teenager, most people are pretty anxious, angsty little babies.
You're emotional.
You're emotional.
You're dealing with adolescence, puberty,
high school,
yeah,
puberty.
It's a tough time. It's a tough time.
It is.
People underestimate how much their personality will change over time. This is known as the end of history illusion. It's based on a study in which they recruited participants of all ages. And they asked them, how different are you today compared to 10 years ago? And they asked them, how different do you think you're going to be 10 years from now? And the basic finding is when people reflect on the past, they will say, you know what, I am different compared to 10 years ago. I'm pretty different. But if you ask them about the future, they will say, I don't think I'm going to be that different 10 years from now. So you ask a 20-year-old, what do you think you'll be like when you're 30? And they'll say, I'll probably be pretty much same person I am now. But then you ask 30-year-olds and they say, actually, I am quite different compared to when I was 20.
It sounds like the phrase, it's not a phase, Mom.
Right. And Mom is always right.
It was, in fact,
it is a phase. So you're young and you're like, rock and roll forever, man. And then you get older and you're not rocking nor rolling anymore.
And respect if you are.
So when it comes to personality, we got that nature-nurture question. We have discussed this in a previous episode. We've even talked about personality. The name of the episode is homosexuality genetic? In case listeners want to look that up. It's interesting. That episode has fewer downloads than other episodes. And you can tell me if you have any theory about this. I think it's the title. I think people read that title and they think they know the answer and they're like, I'm not gonna listen to this. I know the deal with genetics and homosexuality. And I guess the point of the episode is that you don't know the deal, right? Like it's actually more complicated than people think.
Yeah, I think it's probably also the title and the fact that it's almost like a very hot topic, especially the way that it's phrased.
Do you think that makes people less likely to download it?
I think maybe it's a turnoff because they're not sure, like, or maybe they could be thinking that the argument that we're making is different when it's all about gaining knowledge.
Okay. So you think people think we're going to say something controversial that disagrees with what they believe, and then they're like, I don't even want to expose myself to that. Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
almost like an echo chamber kind of or desire for to hear what they want to hear.
All right. Well, what we say in that episode is very interesting. So you should go download it. All right. So we went deep into the weeds into behavioral genetics in that episode. That is the branch of science that most directly answers this nature nurture question. For personality, specifically, to what extent is personality shaped by genes versus the environment? And I'm not going to rehash everything, but I'll just say very briefly, if you look at identical twins, they're genetically identical. You look at identical twins who are separated at birth. They have different environments. They're raised by different parents, different neighborhoods. They grew up in different homes. You can measure the personalities of these identical twins separated at birth and see if they are similar. If they're similar, it's got to be because they have the same genes. Can't be due to having the same environment because their environments are totally different. So you round up a bunch of these identical twins separated at birth, measure their personality, see if there's a correlation. And what you find is yes, there's a correlation. So even though they're raised by different parents, different places, they might have never met each other, they nonetheless have similar personalities. It's not to say that their personalities are exactly the same, but they are similar, which indicates genes got to be doing something.
They're playing into something there.
Genes are doing something. And we could go further. We could put a number on what genes are doing, how much of the variance in personality is due to genes. It's something like 40%. So genes are playing a significant role in the development of personality, but they are not the whole story. Now, if we want to understand the effect of upbringing, we could look at adopted siblings, families that adopt multiple children. Those children are not genetically related to each other, but they're raised in the same home, same parents, same neighborhood. If this shared environment has some effect on personality, we should find that these adopted siblings have similar personalities. We can measure their personality in adulthood. If they're similar, it's got to be due to that shared environment. It can't be due to genes because they are not genetically related. And it turns out adopted siblings do not have similar personalities. They are as similar to each other as they would be to a random person on the street. So this shared environment, parenting, home, whatever siblings tend to share doesn't seem to have much of an enduring impact on personality. And then the rest of the variation in personality, it's got to be due to the non-shared environment, aspects of the environment that siblings don't share. This is like a catch-all category for anything that just isn't the direct effect of genes nor the shared environment. And a lot of the variance is due to that. A lot of personality development is influenced by aspects of the environment that are not shared among siblings. And then you ask, what is that? And the answer is we don't know.
We're unsure still.
Yes. So that is the state of the art when it comes to the nature nurture question. There are more recent methodologies. There's genome-wide association studies where you get tons of people and you sequence their genome and you look for correlations between different genes. And in this case, you can look at personality. Those studies are finding broadly similar results that genes are definitely playing some role in personality.
It's kind of both. It sounds like environment and genes play a pretty significant role.
Yeah, they both play a significant role, but the shared environment does not, which is, I guess, the counterintuitive, interesting finding because, Freud would have told you, your father didn't hug you enough, and that is why you have the kind of personality that you do. And
Don't listen to Freud.
yeah, don't listen to Freud. If you take anything away from this podcast, don't listen to Freud.
Don't ever listen to Freud. But you're right, it is counterintuitive because I
Yeah.
know a lot of parenting styles are even based off of, forming your child into this almost like a specific box or a desired outcome. And to find that it really does not matter all that much. I mean, of course, it has impact, but not near as much as we would predict, or that would be predicative of all of the effort that's put into parenting and research on parenting styles. It's very counterintuitive.
Obviously, parenting affects a lot of things, including, you know, keeping a person alive.
Yeah, of
That's
course.
an important aspect of parenting. But the hope that I will mold my child like clay into a particular kind of person, given our current level of technology, that is not going to come to fruition.
Right.
All right. Talked about personality. Let's move on. Talk about intelligence. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. People get very emotional about the topic of intelligence because they see it as intertwined with morality. Whether someone is a moral patient, do they have moral worth? Here's an
That's very
example.
philosophical.
I suppose it is, but I think it's a common intuition. Here's an example. Many people are okay with eating animals. And if you look into it, most animals are factory farmed. They're in quite poor conditions. They could experience, a lot of pain. And so basically, they're bred to live a terrible life, and then we eat them. And
It's,
on its on its face, one could perhaps argue that this is wrong, and we'll get into this debate at some point in the future. Okay. But right now I just want to make the point that a common intuition is it's not wrong because animals are not intelligent.
depends on the animal.
The animals that we eat definitely vary quite a bit in their intelligence, but in terms of do I feel okay with this? Do I feel
Right.
like it's morally acceptable to eat this creature? I think intelligence comes into play. So, like, if your cow could recite Shakespeare to you, then you might be like, I don't know about, kind of feels weird to eat this cow now. It's a really smart cow.
It would be a very special cow for sure to be able to
Yes.
speak in a human language.
Some people see intelligence and moral patienthood as intertwined, at the very
Yeah,
least.
it makes sense.
And a standard insult is to say that somebody is stupid. We associate stupidity with low status. It's undesirable. If you're looking for a marriage partner, nobody's looking for a stupid person.
Yep,
That's not like a
correct.
desire. That's not a desirable quality. And economically, intelligence is important. If you want to make money in this modern economy, it's gonna be helpful if you're smart. So there are these inescapable moral connotations that make intelligence difficult to discuss. If somebody thinks intelligence determines moral patienthood, they might naturally be very nervous when it comes to discussing intelligence differences across people. Because what if there are differences that might justify treating some people badly? Does that make
Disagree.
sense?
Yes, but disagree.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just like fleshing out this argument
Okay.
that if intelligence determines moral patienthood, what if we discover some people are less intelligent, then the one may use that as a justification for treating that group badly.
Yeah, I can understand.
In much the same way that there are many animals who you could argue we treat quite badly, but for the most part, people don't care.
Right.
People, especially academics, the kind of person who works in academia, professor, they care a lot about intelligence. Many academics see it as their source of status. It's what makes them interesting. It's what they admire in others. And it is these academics who write articles about intelligence and they chatter on social media about intelligence and they care about it so much they have to pretend it doesn't exist. Because if intelligence exists and people vary on it, then first of all, people are unequal in a pretty fundamental way that many academics find aesthetically displeasing. They often are coming from a perspective where they don't want people to be varying in important ways.
Right.
And aside from that, as I mentioned before, people are terrified that if we accept differences in intelligence, somebody is going to use that to justify committing atrocities.
Right.
So I will conclude this preamble by saying the view of the scientific worldview is if a person or group is less intelligent, that is not in itself a reason to treat them badly.
Yes. I agree.
All right. So we do not endorse the idea that intelligence necessarily has any moral consequences.
Correct.
All right. Now that we have cleared our throats, let's get down to business.
Let's do it.
Tana, would you agree that there are some students who do well in school, even though they don't really study that much, and then other students, they do study, but they still don't do so great?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Have you ever met someone and you were able to tell pretty quickly that they were a smart person?
Yeah. You.
Well, obviously. But I mean, aside from me.
Yes.
Okay. If somebody is intellectually disabled, in the past, this was referred to as mental retardation. If somebody is intellectually disabled, what is the chance that given current technology, they would eventually win the Nobel Prize in physics?
In physics,
In physics, yeah.
if they have a really good understanding of physics, I mean, 50-50.
All right, so somebody is very, very low in intelligence, so much so that they need help to complete daily activities.
Yeah.
Would this person be able to get a PhD in physics and produce a brilliant insight in physics, so brilliant that they would win the Nobel Prize? That's the question I'm asking.
I think so because I've seen success stories of people who have a disability intellectually and go on to do amazing things because they have specific understanding and knowledge of a field or of a theory, and it can lead to really high success stories.
All right. So with these questions, I'm trying to gesture at some ideas that can be considered obvious. Looks like the third one, we actually disagree about the third one.
Okay.
But the first one is just the idea that, intelligence is real, okay? There are some students, they don't really study, they do well anyway. Some students study a lot, they don't do so well. There's different reasons for this. One reason is intelligence.
Right.
So this is the scientific worldview. This is not, the politically correct worldview. We're trying to say like real true things here. So I'm just going to I'm going to speak the truth as best as I can. People vary in intelligence, and that affects how well they do in school.
Right.
You have met people in your life who are smart, and you can tell. And you have met people in your life who are not smart, and sometimes you can tell.
Right.
It's not like invisible.
Yes.
Okay. In order to win a Nobel Prize in physics, you have to be a genius. I have a PhD. No chance in hell I'm ever going to win the Nobel Prize in physics. Okay. Even if I
Right.
dedicate my life from now until I die to studying physics and trying to come up with brilliant ideas, it ain't going to happen. I'm not smart enough. You have to be a
Right.
genius. If somebody's average intelligence, no chance they're going to win a Nobel Prize in physics. There's just no chance. Ain't going to happen. And if somebody's intellectually disabled, which is to say they have a very low intelligence, no chance. Now, maybe in the future, there is some technology that allows us to amplify intelligence, although in my question that I posed, I specifically said given current technology. But if you're not brilliant, it ain't going to happen. Everybody cannot win the Nobel Prize in physics. You have to be very smart, And people like me are not smart enough. It's not going to happen.
I couldn't either.
Okay.
I don't understand. I never even took physics.
Okay. Intelligence can be measured using an intelligence test. They are made up of different types of questions that tap into different abilities. There might be questions about your vocabulary, math questions, general knowledge, spatial rotation. You're given an object and you're asked if this was, spun around 180 degrees, what would it look like? Tests of reaction time, memory. You take an intelligence test, you get a score. That score is referred to as your intelligence quotient or IQ. IQ is how smart you are relative to other people in your age group. IQ follows a bell curve. It's a normal distribution. Most people are in the middle. And then you have few people who are at the extremes. So you have few people who are really, really, really smart and few people who are very unintelligent.
Right.
Many people do not like intelligence research. So they will say intelligence isn't real, or intelligence tests only measure how good you are at taking intelligence tests, or the tests are culturally biased, something, something. But these claims are all unfounded. Intelligence tests are basically the best measure in all of psychology. They do a pretty good job measuring how smart someone is.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I've heard all of those arguments from former professors, and they have they have really pushed the point that IQ tests are just the worst measurement out there.
Your professors are wrong.
Thanks for the clarification.
Intelligence tests predict exactly what you think they would. High IQ kids get better grades. High IQ people get more advanced degrees. IQ predicts the kind of job that people go into. So the kinds of people who become physicists, those are the kinds of people who do really well on an IQ test. High IQ people make more money. They have less mental illness, less physical illness, less pain. When it comes to personality, they are slightly lower in neuroticism and they are higher in openness to experience.
Well, that's interesting. I never would have connected it to openness to experience. I kind of would have thought the opposite.
Yeah, smarter people are more likely to be interested in playing with ideas. So, like your typical academic is smart and they're high in openness.
Right.
Intelligence is correlated with brain size. People with bigger brains do tend to be smarter. Correlation is moderate. It's something like 0.3, 0.4. So, not like a very strong relationship, but there is a relationship.
Does brain size correlate with head size? Because I know some people with some big old noggins.
I believe it does. And I believe head size also predicts intelligence,
Ooh, that's interesting.
although that correlation is probably even weaker.
I'm just thinking about the people I know who got some honkin' noggins.
There's lots of different particular abilities related to intelligence, like can you do mathematical calculation? Do you know the definition of this obscure word? It turns out scores on all the different measures of intelligence are correlated. People who are good at math tend to have a good vocabulary. People who think quickly tend to have a better memory. There is a general factor of intelligence known as the G factor. Basically, people who are smart in one way tend to be smart in other ways as well.
Right. Because that's also what I was thinking of with the physics question is there's different ways you can be smart. So maybe you can be smart in one area and for instance like academic achievement, but you're very poor in like street smarts or social like interpersonal relationships. But if they all kind of correlate, that negates my point.
People can definitely be better at one type of problem than another. Like there's people who are really good at math, but they're not good at writing or they don't have a strong vocabulary. But these things correlate.
Right.
They
See, I'm
tend to
the
go
opposite.
together.
I'm very poor at math, but I can write and I can speak.
Well, artificial intelligence can write pretty well, so.
Well, it's artificial.
Yeah, writers, I don't know how much longer those sorts of jobs are going to be around.
And AI is scary.
Yeah. We'll talk about AI. We've talked about AI at length, not on this podcast, but we'll put it to tape eventually.
All right.
One aspect of intelligence is your ability to solve novel problems, come up with creative solutions, notice patterns. This is referred to as fluid intelligence. And this increases up to about age 30, and then it's all downhill.
Right.
And the same thing with mental speed, how quickly you think. After 30, it's just all downhill.
So I have lots
So,
to look forward to.
yeah, I think you have a couple good years left, and then it's just the slow decay of time.
That's just so encouraging.
Yeah, it's bad. Well, I mean, what can I say? It's bad. That said, crystallized intelligence, which refers to your accumulated knowledge of facts, that can go up and stay high until pretty late in life.
Right.
As for the nature nurture question, what determines intelligence? Is it genes? Is it environment? We talked about this in the behavioral genetics episode, but extremely quick recap. In adulthood, most of the variance in intelligence is due to genes. So if we take our identical twins who are separated at birth, they will be similarly intelligent, even though they're raised by different parents in different places. The effect of the shared environment in adulthood is very low, probably somewhere around 0. So it would be fair to say genes have a large effect on intelligence. They're accounting for a lot of the variance. And then things like parenting are not accounting for very much.
It's funny you mentioned that because the valedictorians of my high school were actually two twins. They were co-valedictorians.
Interesting. When it comes to sex differences, in a previous episode, we discussed the fact that men tend to be more variable than women in all sorts of ways. And intelligence is one of these ways. So there's more variation in the distribution of male intelligence compared to female intelligence. So the distribution is just more spread out for men.
Right.
So if we look at, say, geniuses, men are going to be overrepresented. And if we look at people who are very low in intelligence, likewise, men are going to be overrepresented.
Why is that?
Well, I gave a theory the last time we talked about this that has to do with the sex chromosomes.
Mm-hmm.
So I encourage the listener to go through the catalog and find that. I don't remember the title. It's one of our episodes about evolutionary psychology.
Right.
Now, when it comes to averages, there's a slight male advantage. So, in plain English, the average man is slightly smarter than the average woman. From a theoretical perspective, this isn't terribly surprising. There's average differences between men and women in all sorts of features like height and strength and personality. So, it's not surprising that the average intelligence of men and women is not exactly the same. Also, it's consistent with the fact that men do have bigger brains even after you control for body size. But the difference, the average difference, it's a few points. It's like maybe 2 points. So it is pretty small.
That makes sense.
People care about intelligence. What can be done to enhance it? Can we get smarter?
Yes.
Well, you can avoid poison, avoid lead. That was an issue. There's lead in paint, and then kids would like chip off paint from the walls and eat the paint because it was sweet, and that would cause brain damage. So avoiding poison, that's a big one. Malnutrition can depress intelligence. But in terms of environmental interventions, we don't have anything that increases intelligence in the long term.
Isn't there a theory that kind of talks about the way that you can, it's got growth in the name and I'm blanking on it, but the way that you
Oh,
can,
growth mindset.
yeah, that.
Okay, yes. So growth mindset is basically fakey nonsense.
Ah,
It was like these exciting findings, and then later on you do like better studies and you find that it's not really all it's cracked up to be. Basically, these growth mindset interventions consisted of you go to a group of students usually and you tell them, hey, you can become smarter. And the fact that there isn't particularly evidence of this being true, that's not considered a concern. So maybe we're lying to people, maybe, but that's not even like a thought process that's going on. You get these kids and you tell them you could become smarter, and then they're doing better in school because you spent an hour telling them that they can become smarter compared to some other group that you didn't tell that they can become smarter. But basically, over time, you get better research, and the effects of these interventions seems to be very small. I would guess there's basically nothing going on here.
that's interesting. It sounds like it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
To the extent that it works, which I am very skeptical of.
Right.
There have been efforts to increase intelligence. It was thought, well, we'll take young children, we'll give them, extra education, something like a Head Start program. You might have heard of that.
Right.
So you take young kids and you give them extra enrichment or something. And there are studies of this, and it has no long-term effect on intelligence.
I've always heard listening to Mozart as a baby makes kids smarter.
Right, that's another good example of fakey nonsense.
I'm gonna start using that phrase.
Yeah, if only it were so easy.
Right.
You could just listen to Mozart. Alas, it's not so easy. Now, there are things that can be done before a baby is born. These are the only things that actually work. You could do embryo selection. This is a woman goes through IVF. So you extract multiple eggs, you fertilize the eggs, and then you sequence the genomes of all those eggs. And then you use our current knowledge of the relationship between intelligence and genetics to implant the embryo that is predisposed to be the smartest. That is something you could do today, and it would buy you a couple of IQ points.
That feels morally questionable.
There are currently services that focus on health. So there are like businesses that will do this. Woman goes through IVF and then they do this genetic screening and they say, if you implant this embryo, it's, least likely to get cancer and least likely to be schizophrenic and whatnot. I don't think there are services on the market that will specifically give you information about intelligence, but it is in principle the kind of thing one could do.
In theory, yes.
And the ethics of this are very interesting, and we should talk about it on some future episode.
Sounds good.
Speaking of the future, we can already do genetic engineering. So we have CRISPR. You could go in, you could change genes. You tweak the gene. And if we develop that further and have a complete understanding of genetics and how they relate to intelligence, then, I mean, you could radically change how smart somebody is. If you tweak the genes before the embryo develops, then yeah, I mean, sky's the limit.
That's craziness.
There's not a lot of interest in doing this kind of research or funding this kind of research. There are, of course, genuine concerns about how should humanity use such a technology. But even basic research where you might just look for the genes that predict intelligence, even that kind of thing makes people very nervous. And the researchers that do it have to like kind of pretend that they're doing something else, or it's not going to get funding or maybe not even be published. The Journal of Intelligence, which is the leading open access journal on the topic, put out a statement saying they will not publish articles that lead to political controversy. So the editors of this journal explicitly say our number one priority is not truth and knowledge. We don't want to be politically incorrect. We don't want to court controversy. So if you discover something that might be politically correct, we will refuse to publish it.
That also feels unethical.
It certainly is not good for scientific progress.
Right.
Let's move on. Let's talk about creativity.
Let's talk about it.
You're getting a master's in art therapy.
Yes.
So you are an artist of sorts.
Of sorts.
What sort?
I do a lot of painting. I do some digital art. I do some drawing, do some like stuff with moss. I like moss. It's fun.
Like you like paint with it?
No, I
What do you do?
I glue it onto stuff. So I
Oh,
have this
okay.
mirror that I glued moss onto the outside. It kind of looks like a fairy portal. I glued some crystals and some
Okay.
little mushroom figurines. It's cute.
What is creativity? Creative ideas are novel and useful. So it's new and there is some useful application. So if you bake a chocolate cake following a recipe, it's not really creative. I mean, it's been done many times before. It's not novel. If you bake a cake using wood chips and salt, it's not really a useful cake.
It's creative though.
Well, it's not new and useful. So by my definition,
Okay, yeah.
I
Maybe
would
it's
say it's
new
not.
but not useful.
Yes. Researchers will distinguish between big C creativity and little c creativity, like the C in creativity.
Right.
Big C creativity, that's artistic greatness, scientific innovation, mathematical insights. So we're talking, Shakespeare and Einstein and von Neumann, etc. And then little c creativity, that's everyday creativity. So when you do your job, you might come up with a new solution for how to do things better. And it's not an amazing work of brilliance, but it's still a kind of creativity.
Right. Finding novel solutions.
Creativity is moderately heritable. So if we look at our behavioral genetics, we have our twins, identical twins, separated at birth, raised in different places. If one is creative, it is more likely the other will be creative. Creativity is associated with intelligence. Smart people tend to be more creative. And openness to experience. Highly open people tend to be more creative.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Mental illness is generally bad for creativity. This is kind of a myth. People think that being mentally ill makes you creative or something like that. Being depressed definitely does not help creativity. The only exceptions to this are positive schizotypy, tendency towards hallucinations, magical thinking, and being superstitious. So the kinds of people who score high on that, they do tend to be more creative. And then the other exception would be bipolar. Bipolar people tend to be more creative. Although this is limited to artistic pursuits, especially like poetry, or writing or music, as opposed to being a mathematician.
I'm struggling to understand creativity in math because I thought it was like all laid out already, but I'll take your word for it.
Well, mathematicians write papers and they discover new math. And I guess that's a deep philosophical question itself. Are we discovering math? Are you
Math
cr-
is
are
confusing.
you creating math? Like, does the math already exist, man?
Yeah, does the math already exist?
Maybe we'll talk about that at some point.
I'll be confused the whole time.
People who produce great creative works are experts in their field. Great musicians have spent many hours listening to music, many hours playing music. If you look at creative geniuses, they've put in a lot of practice. Have you heard of the 10,000 hours rule?
Yes.
Okay, it's a meme, 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
It was coined by Malcolm Gladwell. Do you know him?
I don't think so.
All right, he's a popular science writer. He wrote this book, Outliers, which I should mention the basic thesis of that book was wrong. So, the main idea of that book was if you are smarter than average, then you achieve more. But beyond a certain cutoff, additional intelligence doesn't really predict achievement anymore. But that's wrong. If you look at like super geniuses, they are achieving more and innovating more, even compared to like mere geniuses.
I've never met either super
Okay.
genius or a real normal genius.
And he coined this 10,000 hours rule. The idea is it takes 10,000 hours of practice to become a world-class expert, at which point you can do something, brilliant in a creative domain. Now, this was based on something psychologists would talk about, which is the 10-year rule. It's the same idea. If you practice 1,000 hours a year for 10 years. So he rebranded that as the 10,000 hours rule. This rule is not a rule. If you actually look at the data, and for instance, how much musical training did classical composers receive before they produced their first, big hit, their first brilliant work? What you find is there's a lot of variance. In this study, it ranged from 2 years to 43 years, and the mean was 19 years. So this idea of, well, there's this 10,000 hour cutoff, you do that, now you can do brilliant things. It's not a useful heuristic.
So you can practice as much as you want or as little as you want.
Creative geniuses who produce great things, they typically have practiced a ton. That
Yes.
is definitely true. But the idea that there's this number that you hit, that's what I'm arguing against here. There isn't like a 10,000 hours number. There's really just a lot of variance in how long it takes people.
Right. That makes sense.
Creative people tend to have wide-ranging interests. If you look at great scientists, they're often interested in fields aside from the field that they work in. They often have artistic interests as well. If you look at big time CEO Steve Jobs, he was the CEO at Apple. At the same time, he was the chairman of Pixar. Elon Musk, as far as I understand it, is the CEO of Tesla and Twitter, now X, and SpaceX.
He's got a lot going on.
He's got a lot going on. And creative geniuses tend to be extremely productive. They just produce a lot more than most creators.
How do you mean?
So if you just look at the number of works produced, so for example, Darwin produced 119 publications. It's a lot of papers.
That
Einstein,
is a lot of paper.
Einstein, 248. Thomas Edison had more than 1,000 patents. So when we look at these creative geniuses, they're known for a couple of big hits. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like there's a couple of amazing insights. Those big hits are the result of many tries. And just the more works that are produced, the more of a chance they're going to hit that like big insight.
Right.
A small fraction of creators produce a large fraction of the total work. If you look at something like science, scientists are contributing to scientific progress, our understanding of the world. But all scientists do not contribute equally to our understanding. There are some who are so brilliant, they are contributing much, much more than the typical scientist. The top 10% most prolific scientists produce about half the total work.
Wow.
You see the same thing in music and classical music. About 250 composers have contributed to the standard repertoire. So these are the songs that you've actually heard, right? There's tens of thousands of classical songs that have been composed, but there's only so many that are considered great and people have actually heard. About half of that standard repertoire was written by only 16 composers.
Yeah, I don't think I could name more than like 5.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about creative thinking. Researchers divide creative thinking into 2 types. There's divergent thinking, which there's a book series that I think was based on this.
Yeah, it's called Divergent.
Yeah.
It's movies too.
Divergent thinking, exploring many possible solutions, coming up with lots of ideas in cases where there's no single correct answer. Can you just generate lots of ideas? One way that this is measured is the alternative uses test. Some normal object is named, like say a brick, and then you're told you have 4 minutes, write down all of the alternative uses for a brick. How many can you come up with? So what do you think, Atana? What are some alternative uses for a brick?
My family has given bricks as Christmas presents.
There you go. Bam.
Doorstops.
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to think what else. Planters,
What does that mean?
weapons.
What's a planter?
Like you could drill a hole in the brick and put a little plant in it.
Okay. That's a good idea.
Weapons. You could throw a brick at someone.
Right. True.
Nightstand. If your
Yeah.
bed is very low.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
Pets. You could put some eyes on it, like a pet rock, but a pet brick.
That's a good idea. All right, Atana, you are a master of divergent thinking. You're very creative in a divergent way.
I try.
Convergent thinking is coming up with the single best solution to a problem. One way to measure this is the remote associates test. You are given 3 words. You have to find a new word that all 3 given words relate to. Are you ready for a remote associates test?
I think so.
Okay, here's your 3 words. Cottage, Swiss, cake.
Cheese.
That's right. Cheese relates to all of those. Cottage cheese, Swiss cheese, cheesecake. All right, here's a harder one. Dream, break, light.
Boat.
Break boat, boat break.
Yeah. Are there brakes on boats? I thought there were.
And then light boat.
Brake light.
Well, they all have to relate to the word that you gave.
Okay. I got confused. That one was harder.
All right. My given answer is day. Daydream, daybreak, daylight.
Okay.
Another way of measuring creative thinking is to use an insight problem. This is the kind of problem where you have to restructure it in order to solve it. You have to look at it in a different way to get the answer. Here's an example. There is an ancient invention still used in many parts of the world today that allows people to see through walls. What is it?
X-ray vision. Goggles.
It's an ancient invention.
It's an ancient invention that lets people see through walls.
Yes.
I don't know. Punching the wall?
A window.
Oh my goodness. I feel like that was right there.
But you see how the question is kind of leading you astray, right?
Right. I thought the wall was solid.
Yeah, you have to kind of like look at it in a different way to get the answer. All right, just one more.
Okay.
A young boy turned off the lights in his bedroom and managed to get into bed before the room was dark. If the bed is 10 feet from the light switch and the light bulb, and he used no wires, strings, or other contraptions to turn off the light. How did he do it?
Does he have a clapper?
He does not have a clapper. No contraptions.
Uh, I don't know. Did he jump really fast?
Turn off the lights. He got into bed before the room was dark.
Was it daytime out?
Yeah, it's daytime. There's sunlight coming in.
Okay. I got that one.
Yeah, you got it. Well, Tsana, there are so many more insights to be plucked and explored, aren't there?
Always.
And I think we should pluck and explore those insights on the next episode of The Scientific Worldview.